We now welcome in senior NBA insider Adrian Wojnarowski. So, Woj, what stage of the Durant trade conversations in?
In my experience, Malika, there's two stages: the day a player requests a trade, and then the day he's traded. So sometimes it takes you looking back at the process to know how far into it you are. But certainly the Nets at this point, they're engaged on a number of fronts for Kevin Durant deals, and a deal of a player of this stature, typically they don't come together quickly. Now, if this trade request had been made prior to the draft and there was sort of the deadline of a draft and the ability to build a deal around picks in that window, it might have moved quicker. But now that we're in the offseason, training camp's still a couple months away, I think that buys the Nets certainly time to continue kind of canvassing the league. And, you start to get into negotiations with teams. They don't always move quickly. The goal of the Nets to get as much as possible. The goal, obviously, of teams who want to trade for Kevin Durant is to give up as little as possible. And certainly that can grind things, to where it's not necessarily a day-to-day back and forth among teams. I do think getting to Summer League, Sean Marks and, you go through the list of other executives who are going to be in Las Vegas, most of them starting Thursday, Friday. I think the face-to-face can be helpful, especially when you're trying to put together more complicated deals that might require 3-4 teams.
Absolutely. So how closely are the Nets and Kevin Durant working together right now, if at all?
Yeah, Sean Marks, the Nets GM's, he's in close contact, regular contact, I'm told, with Kevin Durant's manager, Rich Kleiman. And so they've got a good working relationship. I'm told they've continued to discuss different scenarios and discuss, how they can figure out moving forward here. So I do think that dialogue with the Nets and Kevin Durant's rep, that's been the case here in the days and time leading up to the trade request, and now since Kevin Durant asked out.
So what is the Nets' strategy here? When we're looking at the possible dominoes that can fall, right? One that continues to come to mind is Kyrie Irving. Is it possible that we could see Kyrie traded first?
It is possible, Malika, and obviously you don't have as wide of a swath of teams, as many conversations, not nearly as many going on for Kyrie Irving than you do Kevin Durant. And I think it's more isolated. The Nets have been engaged with the Lakers really here in the last week. And if they got to a place where there was a deal that made sense, that the Lakers wanted to do, that Brooklyn wanted to do, then Brooklyn's got to measure the timing of it and how it would impact where they think they are with Kevin Durant. So the possibility that they could trade Kyrie Irving before Kevin Durant, it exists. There's also a possibility that they don't trade Kyrie Irving. And listen, that they don't find a deal as quickly as everyone might expect for Kevin Durant. Like, all of those things are still on the table. But I think certainly you've got to take them as two individual potential deals. And if you're going to trade them both, how do you get max value for both? The timing may land differently for either of them.
The timing may land differently. It is all about timing here. Woj, thank you so much, and we will see you very soon in Las Vegas, because that's where we are right this very second. In the Thomas and Mack Center for NBA Today. You can see practices going on behind us during our show here. Teams are going to be cycling through ahead of the first games getting underway. But welcoming in now Richard Jefferson and Matt Barnes. Thank you so much for hanging with me today, gentlemen. We just heard a whole lot from Adrian Wojnarowski. And what was interesting to me is the timing piece, right? The timing for the best deal for Kevin Durant might not be the same as the timing for the best deal for Kyrie Irving. What did you make of everything we just heard, Matt?
I mean, obviously, and as they should, the Nets are asking for a king's ransom for KD. Mm-hmm. Arguably one of the, if not the best player in his prime to ever ask to be traded. So I wouldn't be surprised if, like Woj mentioned, deals aren't coming as fast as they want, and we end up seeing KD possibly starting this season in Brooklyn. And then on the flip side, I look at that, if you're trading for Kevin Durant, you're going to have to give up so much. What is the team going to have left? Obviously, there's probably going to be a third and fourth team in there, but I'm thinking that between the two main teams, if KD chooses to go to a team, they're going to have to give up so much to get him. What's going to be left when he gets there? So a lot of tough decisions to be made, and we'll just have to sit back and continue to speculate and enjoy.
Well, and they're both complicated for different reasons. Kyrie doesn't have as many places or probably suitors where Kevin Durant has damn near the entire league.
Right.
But this is what I would say to some NBA teams. I understand that you don't want to give away too much, but you're going to have to give away a lot. That being said, if you've got Kevin Durant on your team to start the season, it looks far better than if you trade for him at some point in time during the season. If you're giving up a lot to get Kevin Durant on your team, it's because you want to win a championship now or in the next two years. So for me, you want to give it up now, get him to his team, get him acclimated, do all the things that you need to do to make sure that you can start the season in the best possible way versus saying, well, we don't want to give up 2 swaps, so now Kevin Durant's not going to be on our team for 20 games or 15 games in the middle of the season.
Right, but I think the balance, though, is that making sure whatever it is you give up, Kevin still looks around at what's still there, and he says, okay, I feel good about going there because we can win.
Well, there's not going to be, you can't win-win in this situation.
But then that's why, you know, if you can't win-win in this situation, as Woj told us on the show yesterday, that's why this is so complicated, why we could either, one, see it drag out, or there's a possibility that as time and situations are jointly presented to the Nets and Kevin looks around and says, I still feel like, because we all know that Kevin wants to win. Like at the end of the day, that's what he wants. And so if it, and I'm not saying he does, but if what you're saying comes to fruition and the choices are, I feel like I could win better with the Nets than I could. Like, that's the balance.
And that's the one thing that I've seen from Kevin Durant, and I don't know him personally, but I will say this. In Oklahoma City, after they, lost to Golden State, he decided to leave, right? Because I think he wanted to just like, hey, I want to play that brand of basketball where everyone moves. He gets there. And then after a little bit of time with the Draymond situation, he's like, okay, this isn't just basketball anymore. I want to go someplace else. Now he goes to Brooklyn, and then all of a sudden it seems like it's not just basketball anymore. It seems like there's a bunch of other things. So that's the reoccurring theme that I've seen with Kevin Durant is when it doesn't become just basketball, he doesn't really want much part of it. And I respect that. Yeah. And so if the Nets can get back to in some way saying like, hey, we just want to focus on basketball here and get rid of the distractions, then, maybe they can convince Kevin. Maybe Kyrie is still on that roster.
Well, I mean, that's the one thing you can knock Kevin for whatever reason you want, but at the end of the day, he wants to win, and he's going to put his best out there every single time he steps on the floor. So you can say whatever you want about the other stuff, his decisions, his going dark on everyone, but the one thing we know about Kevin Durant is when he gets on that floor, he's going to give you his absolute most. So, again, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But again, like I said, with winning being his top priority, teams are going to have to give up so much to get him. When he looks at that roster that he's possibly going to, can I win with this roster, or do I have a better chance, like you said, at winning in Brooklyn? And we'll have to see.
Right. And I mean, I covered Kevin Durant in Brooklyn for 2 years. We have not spoken in this process. I wouldn't say we're especially close, but from being around him every day, that's sort of what I've noticed. It's about winning. And so what keeps making all of these trade scenarios that our insiders are coming up with and presenting to us that make sense maybe for one team don't necessarily make sense for Brooklyn or make sense for Kevin, and that's why this is such a difficult needle to thread here, with winning being the through line that they're trying to pull.
Well, the most important thing here is you're getting Kevin Durant for 4 years. Let's not just make it seem like, hey, we need to win today. It's like, no, we can say it's like, hey, this is our core. Absolutely. And over the next 1 year, 2 years, we can add these pieces, we can add these pieces, and maybe in the last 2 years of your deal is when our team is going to be fully loaded.
He has to buy into that
Agreed.
Plan, right?
Agreed,
that's it. He has to be able to say, yes, cool, because you don't make a trade and mortgage all this for Kevin Durant if you don't feel like Kevin Durant is going to come there, buy in, give you the time for the 4 years. And if he buys into that vision, and there are men, there are general managers who are so brilliant at doing that, someone like Masai Ujiri selling Kawhi Leonard on a vision for 1 year, that there are people who can do that, but it's not everybody that can do that.
No, really quickly, remember, LeBron James won in his second year in L.A. He won in his second year in Cleveland. He won in his second year in Miami. So it's not just about showing up and saying this. You remember what LeBron James showed up with in L.A. and what it turned into. So Kevin Durant and his team have to have the vision of like, hey, might be what it is today, but this is what it can turn into.
As long as all those cards are on the table and they're all reading the tea leaves the same, that could be a beautiful thing.
To Las Vegas, that includes Rob Pelinka, and Rob Pelinka will be able to have a face-to-face conversation with Sean Marks of the Brooklyn Nets, and they can discuss things like, are we going to be able to put together a deal here? And are we actually getting your best offer yet? Has it just been positioning from both sides? Can we actually come down to brass tacks and figure out a deal here? If the Lakers can't figure something out with Kyrie, if that's not feasible, they're going to have to move on because their roster is incomplete. They are still missing shooting with the current group. They introduced all the new guys yesterday. Thomas Bryant brings some shooting as a stretch 5, and obviously Lonnie Walker at times has hit around 40% in his career, but they need more. And Rob Pelinka and the Lakers brass believe that they can acquire that via trade. And whether that not be the major trade in Kyrie Irving.
Yeah.
Perhaps you call up the Indiana Pacers and see about Buddy Hield, who they almost traded for last year.
Right.
How about Eric Gordon in Houston, who will be in a rebuilding situation, could be part of a more competitive team? Those are some of the things they're going to look at. But the first domino, they got to figure out if Kyrie's realistic or not.
Oh, and we know that shooting around LeBron James, that tends to be something that works. But they also have a new head coach in Darvin Ham, and you had a chance, Mark, to spend some time with Darvin, chat with him. What is he saying about how his coaching style could pair with, or maybe how he would use Russell Westbrook if he is still on the roster?
Well, they're BFFs right now. They're talking on the phone, they're texting, they're having lunch and dinners together. And he said, man, don't count him out. He has a clear plan for him to push his energy. He also expects him to be a starter. He loves Russell Westbrook. But I said, well, what about the other chatter? I know he's heard about Kyrie and all those things, and obviously he can't talk about other players, but he said he doesn't pay attention to that or listen to that. He watches the History Channel.
Well, he falls asleep to the History Channel or watches the History Channel? I mean, but
depends on what history it is.
See, there you go. The thing is, though, Matt, for a coach, you have to look at who is on the roster. You can't necessarily fully go into planning for the hypothetical moves that could be made. What is ideal when you're looking at if Russell Westbrook, as you're reporting, Mark, is going to be a starter? What is the role that would be ideal for him to play if the Lakers want to not just win it, get back into the playoffs? Let's start there.
Well, I mean, I think if the dust settles and Russ ends up being here, and I think that's what Darvin Ham's focus is. Obviously, he's on the team now. You don't know what's going to happen, so we're assuming that Russ is going to be there. But sometimes, as Mark touched on, you need a coach that's able to push these guys' buttons, and Darvin Ham could possibly be that coach that can remotivate Russ, have a conversation with Russ, kind of tell him what he sees and what he feels like his best possible roles. We all know Russ is a very confident, sometimes stubborn, hard-headed guy, but at the same time, when you respect where the voice is coming from, whether that be a coach or an older player, sometimes you change your tune. So if the dust does settle and the Lakers are with Russell Westbrook, it's not a terrible thing, again, because I feel like maybe Darvin Ham can be that one guy that really gets into him and has him back to playing, not necessarily who he was in OKC, but something suitable for his age and what helps this team the most.
And Matt, it's a really savvy move by Darvin because of the many things that went wrong for the Lakers last year. The personal relationship between Frank Vogel and Russell Westbrook wasn't there.
Right.
And so Darvin, who knows if Russell's going to be on the team, but if he is, Darvin's already laying out that path to make things work.
Well, and in Milwaukee, that was one of the things. Players respected Darvin Ham so very much.
And he keeps it 100, 1,000, 1 million.
Every minute of every day of the year.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, he's wearing them because we need to get Mark Spears out of here. He's got some big
Wedding
plans. Wedding crasher.
Congratulations, Cody Woods.
We'll let you go to Cody Woods' wedding, Mark. We appreciate the time here on NBA Today. But still to come, Mr. Zion Williamson, he signed a mega extension. So free agency, it really is in full swing. It's almost time for all of us to hop on a plane, head to Las Vegas for Summer League. But the basketball world is still on Kevin Durant watch. So where does his trade request stand as of right now, this moment today?
And Malika, listen, Brooklyn continues to talk to teams around the league and, try to see, in a lot of scenarios, if there are multiple team deals they could put together to get back the assets that they would want for Kevin Durant, which are immense. You saw, I think, part of the baseline set with the Rudy Gobert trade, essentially 5 first-round picks, and that would only be, I think, part of the return Brooklyn would want. They want high-level players, perhaps an all-star, and then more players. They think this should look like one of the biggest trade returns in league history because there's never been quite a player like Kevin Durant on the market. And I think as executives get to Vegas this week, a lot are going to arrive in town Thursday, Friday, ahead of the weekend. I think there's an expectation that GMs and team presidents getting in front of each other, Sean Marks being able to visit face-to-face with other GMs, I think that could be helpful in putting deals together.
Well, given that price tag, that asking request is going to be so high, that it is so immense, is there a path here, Woj, where we could see Kevin Durant return to Brooklyn?
Absolutely, especially, Malika, if this drags out and if there's not a deal found here in the next month and it goes into August and you get closer to training camp, Brooklyn, they don't have to take a deal that they don't want to do. They don't have to talk themselves into a deal. But then at the same time, I think Kevin Durant, as he looks at the situation, could he look at it differently over time? That's certainly a possibility. And I think as you look, if you're Kevin Durant and you start to look at the teams that you might land at, and then what those teams might look like after they have to unload so many assets, I think that's why there's no rush in this process. And I think perhaps there'll be a time where there's better communication going on between Brooklyn and Kevin Durant, and maybe that could impact the idea of him returning. But I don't think anybody's counting on it. And I think all sides are, proceeding as though, listen, that Kevin Durant will be traded at some point. But because of the years left on his contract, 4 years on his contract, and the fact that this is the off season, things can change, they can evolve, there's no question. Maybe at some point the Nets come to Kevin Durant with a trade and say, hey, here's something we're about to do. And he looks at it and says, maybe I'd rather stay here. Now, he doesn't have say. Brooklyn could go forward with it. I just think, Malika, there are a lot of scenarios where certainly Kevin Durant gets moved, but yes, where he could stay because people do change their minds. They change course. And the fact is, he's under contract, and they still have a very talented, pretty talented deep team in Brooklyn that when you look at it up against other teams in the league should be, with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving playing at a high level, should believe they can play with anybody.
Well, one of those players that is on that team as we stand here in this moment is Kyrie Irving. He opted into that roughly $37 million player option just a couple of weeks ago. How does he factor into how Kevin Durant is weighing his trade request here?
Yeah, and I think that's another consideration Brooklyn has to make about whether it's a positive or negative to move Kyrie Irving either before Kevin Durant or after Kevin Durant. The market is certainly very different for Kyrie Irving, and the Nets have talked with the Lakers, and I believe there's been, back and forth in communication. And, you look at where there's cap space right now. A team like San Antonio could be a facilitator right now in a let's say a Russell Westbrook, Kyrie Irving deal between the teams. They have the cap space. Now you would have to incentivize them at a pretty high level. And I think that's, I think the willingness of the Lakers to incentivize a deal with multiple draft picks, I think that's still, part of the reason, that's a deal that hasn't gone anywhere yet. That can always change. Again, Rob Pelinka, Sean Marks in Vegas this week and moving forward. I'm sure they'll have conversations there. But I do think that's part of the equation for Brooklyn is, again, do they handle the Kevin Durant deal first and then revisit this? And I think the Lakers' motivation, they've looked at other deals. They've continued, I know, to check in on Eric Gordon in Houston. That's certainly a player that interests them. Buddy Hield in Indiana. Different kinds of guards, shooting guards, certainly both of those players, former Rob Pelinka clients, right? Hield, Eric Gordon. So the Lakers are looking out at different scenarios out in the marketplace, but there's no question Kyrie Irving is one of them.
So you mentioned the Lakers, so let's shift to the West if we could here, because DeAndre Ayton's restricted free agency, it appears to be one of the key offseason dominoes that's yet to fall. So what can you tell us about where the Suns stand on Ayton right now?
Emily, the Kevin Durant talks have probably slowed up. In fact, I'm confident they've slowed up, I think, some of the marketplace for DeAndre Ayton, because teams who would look at sign-in trades, Ayton would impact their ability to do a Durant deal. Teams with salary cap space, who right now could throw an offer sheet or do a sign-in trade with Phoenix. Let's say teams like Indiana. Utah, San Antonio, and all teams, certainly a young center fits into their timeline and their sort of organizational need. But certainly Phoenix knows, listen, I think the worst case scenario for Phoenix is DeAndre Ayton signs a max offer sheet somewhere, and they've got to make a decision on matching it. If they match it and keep him, maybe they trade him, which they can't do for a year. But I think in those scenarios, I think for the Suns, it's talk, sign, and trade with teams who have cap space and can threaten to sign him to a sheet, like Indiana, who's getting up there in terms of their ability to throw down a max sheet at DeAndre Ayton, or teams who don't have cap room, who just want to do a sign and trade, and that way Phoenix would get back assets for them. But Phoenix all along has been reluctant to max out DeAndre Ayton. The expectation is he will still find one at some point here in the marketplace. But the Kevin Durant talks, I think, have complicated the timing of DeAndre Ayton, but I think that will pick up again here in the coming days.
So for now, we wait and we head to Las Vegas. Adrian Wojnarowski, thank you so much for your time and for your reporting. So a whole lot of interesting stuff there that Woj shared with us. It really has been an eventful offseason for the Nets thus far. You can take a look at it, but the thing that I want to circle is at the top there. Kyrie Irving opting into that $36.5 million player option, and then obviously Kevin Durant requesting that trade just before the start of free agency on Thursday, acquiring Royce O'Neal, and then agreeing to terms with Patty Mills, Nick Claxton, TJ Warren, Kessler Edwards, and Edmund Sumner. So here now, I want to bring in our Brian Windhorst and Kendrick Perkins. Based on all of what we just heard from Woj, I want to circle back to one thing. This domino of Kevin Durant, waiting for that to fall and impact not only Kyrie Irving, but also, Brian, impact players like DeAndre Ayton. What are you hearing from around the league? What stood out to you from the reporting we just heard?
Yeah, well, from what I understand, I don't think the Nets are thrilled with the offers that they've gotten for Durant yet. I don't think that's a hot take, considering that they're, reassessing with where they're at. And I think the reason is this. It's somewhat known in the NBA that Durant prefers going to the Phoenix Suns. And the Suns' offer and what they have to offer right now just isn't that interesting to Brooklyn. Brooklyn is interested in other things. That's why Woj and others talk about potentially needing a third or fourth team in a deal. And so if you're a team like the Raptors, or, for example, who we've heard about have interest and has had some discussions with Brooklyn, the bar that you have to clear isn't the Nets' expectation. It's what the expectation or what the offer is from the Suns. And so I don't think that the premium offers that I think a lot of us in the media sometimes jump to when we talk about, oh, well, Team A can offer the Nets this, and we list like 4 or 5 beautiful players and asset stuff and swaps and picks and everything. They don't often come out of the gate like that. And that's why if you study history here about superstar trades over the last 10 to 15 years, and we now have a lot of them, especially those trades that happen in the summer, there's 2 things that we often see. One, they tend to take time. They don't happen sometimes in the first week of July, especially when the trade demand comes late. And secondly, they often aren't for the haul that we always assume in the start. And especially as this pertains to the Raptors, Malika, I will refer you to the Kawhi Leonard trade back in 2018. The Raptors and Masai Ujiri, their team president, basically outlasted the market on that. Their offer, while it did have DeMar DeRozan in it, an excellent player, their offer that the Spurs ultimately took was lower than we thought was going to come for Kawhi Leonard. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Masai sticks to that same formula and tries to wait the Nets out. And that's what we're in right now, the waiting game.
Well, you mentioned time, and that's something that's so interesting that Woj reported. Kendrick, you were in these locker rooms. When it comes to waiting, Woj said that, the longer this takes, the more sort of options that Kevin Durant is going to need to weigh, including looking at a team and saying, once all of these players and picks are gone, is this somewhere I want to land, play, and think I can win? How does time, in your eyes, as a player, weigh into all of this?
Oh, it weighs heavy. And we're talking about Kevin Durant, right? And we're talking about the effect that it has on everybody else in the locker room. Like, you're going to start getting to the point where teams are going to start hosting their private workouts. You know, players are going to get together and start meeting up in certain locations and having their bonding time and things to that nature. You want to get ahead of the curve. Here's the thing that I have to ask, right? We're still talking about Kevin Durant. And what is showing me right now is that the league and a lot of GMs are valuing these young up-and-coming superstars or stars that they have. When you look at a situation like the Toronto Raptors, right, I think Masai Ujiri is hesitant to include Scotty Barnes in the deal. Again, we're talking about Kevin Durant, right? So I'm looking at the league and I'm looking at like how GMs are starting to value these young superstars, and it's very interesting to me. And it's also a wake-up call to a lot of people around the league, especially the older vets. Again, Malika, Wendy, we are talking about Kevin Durant is on the market. KD, arguably the best scorer to ever play the game of basketball, the best scorer in my eyes that's still playing right now to this day. And teams are reluctant to give up young superstars. Like, think about that for a second. Not saying that they're not, but the fact that Masai Ujiri is saying, hold on, Scotty Barnes is not included in this trade package. That speaks volumes to me.
But part of it is the balance, right? The balance between needing to have someone still on the roster that Kevin Durant wants to turn around and say, oh, you gave up all of this, but I can go make that work. I think that's part of the balance here, Wendy.
I think it's about the deal. You're making a deal. You're not, I mean, no one is arguing about how incredible the player Durant is and how having him on your roster with 4 years on his contract is valuable. But again, you are operating in a marketplace, and you know, if you're an executive out there, what you're trying to do here is you're trying not to overpay. When the Rudy Gobert trade went down last week, it wasn't that people were surprised that Gobert got traded. People were surprised at what it cost for Gobert to get traded. And these teams that are making these deals are worried about cost of the trade, not necessarily the value of having Durant.
Absolutely, and that's something that we're going to see teams weigh, especially as Woj said, GMs, front office folks, they are descending on Las Vegas in the coming days, and that's where we see the sausage get made. Okay.
Would think that they can't contend for a title. That's just because you're hating on the situation. He goes there, they might win the West.
Y'all can have the Lakers conversation.
You out?
I'm going for it.
Okay, cool. And present.
Start your off season already?
Yeah.
Okay.
Man, the buffet doesn't close till 5:30, bro. Anyways, so what we were talking about, why I like it also is because we forget about Phil Handy.
I'm sorry. Hey, Park, we're talking about the Lakers again today. You good with that?
Yeah, I'm good. I got a weekend of rest. I'm straight. I ate good, so I'm good. I'm good to hear about the Lakers.
Okay, I mean,
Dave, what you got for us, Dave?
Just so everybody is aware, Dave included, you really did have a flight to catch. We learned that, so I'm good with that. But since producer Perk mentioned it, Dave, we'll start with you. You have your pulse on the Lakers up to the minute. Woj reported earlier on our show that a third team, you know, a team like the Spurs, right, they could get involved as a third team in order to help facilitate getting Kyrie Irving to Los Angeles and moving Russell Westbrook out. But how do you see the Lakers being able to legitimately reunite Kyrie and LeBron here?
Yeah, Malika, Adrian described it so well that the Lakers do have the type of package that should be able to acquire Kyrie Irving, especially the signal is out the league that Kyrie would like to be in LA beyond next season. So any other team that was to try to deal for him would be getting a rental player. And quite frankly, a rental player with some warts who has really been unreliable the last several seasons. Now, the question is Brooklyn actually have no interest in bringing on Russell Westbrook, or is this Brooklyn's positioning in order to try to get the Lakers to offer up more?
Right.
Because, you know, this could come down to the Lakers kind of bidding against themselves because it's known that Kyrie wants to be in LA. And so that's going to be the interesting part here. Great reporting from Adrian Wojnarowski positing that the Spurs could be that third team because, quite frankly, the Spurs, have we seen them not tendering an offer to Lonnie Walker and trading DeJounte Murray, they are not in win-now mode. and they're going to need some inning eaters, and Russell Westbrook can certainly be that for them.
Okay, so Kendrick, since you're ready now to talk about the Lakers, I'm so glad you decided to join us for this one. What do you make of what we just heard from Dave?
The Lakers better be very, very careful, right, when dealing with Russell Westbrook. And I say that to say this. I understand that they want Kyrie Irving, and rightfully so. I do agree that Kyrie Irving moves the needle. But when you talk about Russell Westbrook, we're talking about a guy that didn't have a great season last year, a guy that was being booed, a guy that didn't fit in well, had one of the worst seasons in his career, and he still had some great numbers for as your average NBA player. But if you're talking about, involving Russell Westbrook in the trade, and you talk about getting Kyrie Irving, just say it don't happen. Now you have to bring Russell Westbrook back in. Now you have to worry about putting a Band-Aid over that wound and bring it back and letting Russell Westbrook know that he's wanted, because he's an emotional guy. And you don't want to see the same Russell Westbrook that you saw last year. So if I'm the Lakers, I'm very, very careful on how I approach this Kyrie Irving situation.
Okay, but for so far, what we've seen the Lakers do this season, we've seen them, or this offseason rather, we've seen them make sort of these moves around the edges, these sort of perimeter moves. So, Perk, I'm going to start with you here. How would you describe the Lakers' offseason up until this point?
I honestly believe, I think they having the worst offseason. You got LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and they really haven't did anything to move the needle. And I'm going to just leave it at that. Not if you consider yourself a contender. You haven't did anything to absolutely move the needle. Not like the other teams are doing right now. And no disrespect to these players, but in my opinion, they're not moving the needle and trying to help you win a championship.
Malika, I talked to one Western Conference team today who had interest in Kyrie Irving and said they're out because they said the Nets were asking for too much. What they wanted back in return, without naming the players, was basically a starter and a half, almost two young front court players from them. And so this team does not have picks, so they did not add it in, so they're out. That doesn't mean that's going to be what the Lakers and perhaps the Spurs are going to be giving in. But I think knowing Joe Tsai and how he trusts in Sean Marks, he's going to want Sean Marks to get the best deal possible, and they're not going to do Kyrie Irving any favors. I would agree with Perk as well. Russell Westbrook, the dynamic between Russell Westbrook and LeBron James, I'm very curious about this, Dave, because if Russell Westbrook comes back and they don't get Kyrie Irving, and Russell Westbrook's going to know that any move made by the Lakers would have had to be signed off by LeBron James, especially with Kyrie Irving. What do you think that dynamic is going to be if Russell Westbrook has to return?
If he has to return, he's got to play better basketball for them to have any shot of doing anything next year. He was one of the league leaders in turnovers, one of the league's worst players when it comes to outside shooting, only behind Julius Randle in terms of the amount of shots he took from the perimeter and his inability to convert on them. So honestly, the relationship will have to be figured out on the basketball court. I think the other stuff doesn't really matter. And guess what? Like, Perk, I understand your point. You had to take care of your players in the contingency that player would be back with the team next year. Now, you saw some of that from Darvin Ham at his first day introductory press conference where he was lauding Russell Westbrook. But it's no secret that the Lakers have interest in trading Russell Westbrook if they can. And so you got to live in reality too, Perk.
Right, so that's the Lakers side of things. Let's go to the Clippers. Okay, yes, Kendrick.
No, I agree. I agree. No problem with that.
Okay, I thought you were. I was like, oh, okay. I thought Kendrick was coming for you. All right, let's go to the Clippers. I'm going to make this simple. Kawhi, Paul George. What have they been up to? It's been a while.
So Kawhi has yet to be cleared for 5-on-5 basketball as of last week, but he is still progressing. They're obviously taking things very slow with Kawhi. But in the meantime, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, from what I've been told, have been organizing workouts with the team, getting as many as 8 to 12 guys in the gym, not only in Los Angeles, but then they did have almost like a field trip in San Diego to visit Kawhi a few weeks ago, work out there with him. They're going through drills. And then the vets usually get together again in Las Vegas for a few days during Summer League so they can watch the young guys play while working out there. From what we've been told, Kawhi Leonard looks good. He's on pace to kind of make his way back. He's been working with what Lawrence Frank calls a maniacal work ethic.
Yes.
So I just think they're going to take things very slow, but at least these guys are continuing to work on their chemistry.
Well, John Wall is going to play a piece, right, in that chemistry. Well, what's the Clippers' plans for the All-Star, the former All-Star point guard here?
So I've been told that this is going to be a point guard starting competition, basically, between Reggie Jackson and John Wall in camp. I think the Clippers need to see what John Wall still has left. In fact, they haven't seen him for over a year. Nobody has.
Yeah.
But John Wall recently worked out at the team facility. And so that gives the Clippers really their first glimpse of how he's going to look in 5-on-5. What we need to see is, does he still have that elite speed that has made him so good? Can he shoot the ball and play off ball? Because, listen, John Wall at his best is when he has the ball in his hands. But if he's going to be on the floor with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, there's only one ball to go around. He's going to have to play off the ball and be able to catch and shoot.
Yeah.
But I think what Ty Lue is going to like about John Wall is that he's going to be able to push the pace. The Clippers have been like the slowest team in the NBA. They don't run. Ty Lue every year talks about, I'd like us to run more. John Wall can push the pace. Are there going to be guys that run with him? That is going to be the question. But I think the Clippers are starting to see, they're getting their first glimpse of what John Wall can do when he just worked out 5-on-5 in the facility.
Well, I've said this a couple of times over the last couple of days. The Nuggets are my dark horse right now in the West. I really like what they're doing. I don't think you can call the Clippers a dark horse. I think they're just talented. If they can get healthy, they are going to be a team to watch. What do you think, Perk?
They're my favorite to win it all. Yes, I'm saying it today, July the 6th, 2022. A healthy Clippers team is the team that is going to be my favorite to win it all. You think about Kawhi Leonard, right? He's when healthy, he's a top 5 player in the NBA. Paul George, we know what he's capable of doing. He showed us signs of that last year and before that he's back. Reggie Hot Sauce Jackson. Most importantly, right, they have wings. They have wings, versatile wings. 3 and D. Yes.
The
3
food
and D
the
guys.
position.
When you think about them, when you think about them re-signing Nicholas Batum, a guy that could defend multiple positions, stretching the floor, cutting, a guy that could defend multiple positions and stretch the floor as well, give those guys spacing. They re-signed Big Zubac. You still got Norman Powell over there, a guy that has shown us he's capable of averaging 20. And then you have one of the best coaches in the game of basketball in Ty Lue. I'm looking at this Clippers team, and I'm like, look, if they're healthy next year, they should be the favorites going into the season. No disrespect to the Golden State Warriors, right? I understand y'all won it. But the Clippers healthy, they're my favorite and my pick to win it all.
And Perk, I'm caught up with a member of the organization over the holiday weekend, and they're already talking that way, and they should be. It's not that they're cocky. It's not that they're saying championship or bust, but the window is wide open for them. They are very much aware of that, and they feel like as an organization, no one would have planned for the injuries that occurred to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, but they feel like they've done everything in that time to get the rest of the group ready to strike when those guys take the court. Now, I mean, it's been like a long time with no 5-on-5. Hopefully that's just overly cautious because that's going to be key to the whole operation. But put all the pieces together, as Perk said it, they should be 4 teams that you'd say they'd be in that top 4 to win the championship.
Hey, listen, when you add some talent and a little bit of something to prove, that can be a dangerous and delicious recipe, and that's what the Clippers got cooking. All right, still to come on NBA Today, we're going to debut a new segment with Brian Windhorst, and we're going to talk about why there's a better than good chance we're going to see that performance at the Oscars next year. I mean, the way you built the suspense, the timing. I mean, it was an absolute masterclass. I was scrolling the memes all weekend. Can I ask, Brian, what your reaction was to seeing that blow up on Twitter?
It's so rare that we ask questions like that and they are answered so quickly, which the Jazz answered very nicely before the holiday weekend in trading Rudy Gobert. My weekend was spent with my 4-year-old who wanted to know where I'd been for 8 of the last 9 weeks. He did not care about the memes, but he was happy nonetheless, and so that made it a good weekend.
Well, I thank you because they made me happy, and I that's all I can ask for. It made me smile. All right, so it's only natural that we turn that moment into a little segment called "Why Would?" Perk, can you give me a little, why? A little Brian, a little. Yep, there it is. So, Perk, please chime in here as well. You look like you're doing from the windows to the wall. The floor is yours, though, Brian.
Yeah.
Let's start with why would the Nets prioritize players over picks?
Well, Malika, they don't control their next 5 drafts. That's been traded to the Houston Rockets. So They went through this process when they rebuilt after trading away their draft control to the Celtics, and it took a long time for them to get back on their feet. And so if you look at the transactions that they have made this offseason, picking up Royce O'Neal, which is a win-now move, re-signing Patty Mills, signing TJ Warren, these are veteran pickups. Those are not rebuild moves. Those are moves designed to continue to compete for next season. And so, by the way, and as Woj said earlier, they don't just want veteran players. They want veteran players and picks. They want everything. They want it all. So, but, if you go back, I think what Joe Tsai is looking for is he's looking for a team that competes and is competitive for the playoffs. Like the team that he had before Durant and Kyrie got there. I think that's what he wants. He doesn't want a team that wins 17 games.
Kendrick?
And he shouldn't. Look, he should want to compete. He shouldn't want to go from Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving to rebuilding. Who wants to do that? And there's so much that you could get back for Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. I wouldn't want picks either. Give me a young superstar, a young star in the making to come build so I can continue to be the most relevant thing in New York when it comes to basketball. I could have the edge over the New York Knicks when it comes to basketball. We could talk about the Brooklyn Nets in the city of New York when it comes to basketball. Give me superstar, star caliber young players over picks any day.
So then next question, why would the Raptors not go all in on Kevin Durant, Mr. Windhorst?
Because they might not have to. Let's take a look at history. The history is the Kawhi Leonard trade. When they did the Kawhi Leonard trade, they didn't necessarily have the best offer, but they were able to wait it out. And then more important, Malika, they had a good sense of the market for Kawhi Leonard. And so right now, as they look at the market for Kevin Durant, I'm not so sure they feel like they need to make their highest and best offer. I think they know that the Suns' offer isn't what the Nets want. I think they know that Zion Williamson is now off the board. They can't trade for him. I think they know that the Heat can't beat the offer that they had. So why should Masai Ujiri, who, by the way, playing poker in the Kawhi Leonard sweepstakes worked out for him. Why wouldn't he employ the same strategy here? Make an offer and wait for it to need to be improved. Look, if you look at what they've got, they're holding a pretty strong hand. They have Pascal Siakam. They have OG Anunoby. They control all of their draft picks. Why would we even need, if you're them, you'd say, why would we even need to discuss Scotty Barnes at this point? I don't think not only do I not think Scotty Barnes is in the offer, I don't think he's anywhere close to being in the offer yet. And maybe that'll backfire on him, but Masai Ujiri won doing this in the past. And I think he likes his position. And so that's why the Nets, I think, are pulling back and even contemplating, hey, maybe we just don't trade him. That's a negotiating position for him, for them, just like Masai Ujiri has a negotiating position, and I think it could end up being quite effective depending on where the Nets want to draw the line.
Kendrick?
Can we be honest for a second?
I hope
if you're
that's
a general
all we do.
manager, if you're Masai Ujiri, do you fully trust Kevin Durant like that? If we're being honest here and we look at KD history, if I'm somebody in the front office, I'm not just putting all my trust in the KD. I don't know what he's thinking or when he might decide to leave or when he might request a trade. So why would I give up a young superstar or superstar caliber player and Scotty Barnes that I know has a ceiling that has a high ceiling? I wouldn't do that either.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Why Would? Thank you for playing, and please let's
Who came up with the music?
Oh, you like it? I kind of am a fan.
I like it.
Yeah, I'm with it. Hey, guys, it's WNBA All-Star Weekend in Chicago, Saturday on ESPN. 3-point contest.